Good evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging the people of the Nonawal Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Good evening, everyone, esteemed guests, all protocols observed. It is my great pleasure to join all of you this evening and present this Sir John Crawford Memorial Address on food and nutrition security, the climate, food systems, agroforestry, and Forestry Nexus. I want to thank the Crawford Fund for inviting me to speak on these critically important topics so very close to my heart. As we navigate what it takes to stay within 3 degrees Celsius to avoid a climate tipping point, we also face immense food security and nutritional challenges. According to the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report, an additional 122 million people have been pushed into hunger since 2019. Of the 2.4 billion people facing a lack of constant access to food, around 900 million individuals faced severe food insecurity. Moreover, access to healthy diets has deteriorated since the global pandemic, with 3.1 billion people unable to afford a nutritious diet in 2021, an increase of 134 million people compared to 2019. We all know the challenges humanity is facing. However, we also have access to decades of action research and development data that show solutions to problems, opportunity to reimagine the way we interact with nature. And we can do it through global cooperation, knowledge sharing, and a deep commitment to building a better world. One that respects nature and one where people can live healthy lives and with enough nutritious food. Trees, forests, landscapes play a critical role in this, and without them, a food-secure, nutritious future is impossible. Warren Buffett once said, "Someone's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago." Some of the work we do today may take a long time to bear fruit, but a lot of it can be an almost immediate impact on well-being and food and nutritional security. I'm told I'm the first person in the forestry and agroforestry space to be delivering this address, and so I look forward to sharing what forestry and agroforestry have to do with climate and food systems. And it's an immense honor for me to be here to do so. Over the past 4 months, since I joined CIFOR ICRAF, I have experienced a number of firsts, including becoming the first African woman CEO of a CGIAR center. These firsts are both great privilege and a great responsibility, and one that I'm delighted and eager to take on. And as such, it feels very fitting that you've welcomed me here this evening to speak on food and nutrition security. But my trajectory was not meant to bring me here today. Now, I must mention the challenges that CIFOR ICRAF is working to solve, and I would like to take the opportunity this evening to introduce myself through these challenges. Like many of you, these challenges have touched my personal life. They have influenced what I have studied in university, the direction of my life, and the decisions I make. And they are challenges that I hope my own child and other children will not be left to grapple with once they take over leadership from us. I was born in Rwanda in the 70s, where I was privileged to have the poignant memories of childhood all connected to the earth and the lessons I learned from my mother on how to take care of the earth. Having grown up on 3 continents, when I embarked on my journey from Kigali to Montreal in August 1989 at the age of 17, I expected to be back 3 years later from McGill University with my bachelor's degree in general agriculture in hand to work with smallholder farmers, but life had different plans. I started university with a desire to be on the cutting edge of what's possible and to use these scientific tools to improve lives, particularly the lives of the most vulnerable to food security and malnutrition in Africa. But I didn't expect that the arc of my life would take me on an unexpected journey that would take me 34 years to get back to the continent to settle. When Rwanda initially went through a civil war, I went home as a 19-year-old intern to work on improving local forages But what should have been a summer of immense immersion in research and action was also a summer of getting authorization passes from field side to field side, going through checkpoints manned by armed military. When this escalated in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in April 1994, I was 22 years old. At that point, I was writing my master's thesis on mapping resistance genes to plant viruses while my homeland was aflame. Time magazine had this cover. There are no devils left in hell. They're all in Rwanda. This is a memory I will hold in my heart forever. Somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people were slaughtered in 100 days. Many were slaughtered with machetes that should have been meant for agricultural use. What many people don't know is that as a result of this terrible time in Rwanda's history and its aftermath, many forested lands were lost. Rwanda's Gishwati forest, which was about 100,000 hectares, lost 99% of its cover, the result of subsistence harvesting and cultivation by refugees in the aftermath. This brings me to the challenges that CIFOR ICRAF is solving, safeguarding biodiversity. Here are some grim statistics. Over 50% of the world's tropical forests have been destroyed. On average, 137 species are driven to extinction in tropical rainforests every day. And more than a quarter of assessed species are threatened with extinction. But there's good news. There's an incredible amount of work on the ground right now to counter this. Prior to joining CIFOR ICRAF, I was on the executive board of the Global Crop Trust, which was lucky enough to work with the Honorable Tim Fisher, former Deputy Minister of Australia. The organization provides funding to key seed bank and gene banks around the world, including CIFOR ICRAF's tree gene bank in Nairobi, so they can safeguard the seeds and share them with farmers, researchers, and plant breeders globally. I was already familiar with the importance of gene banks before joining CIFOR ICRAF and the Crop Trust. In fact, I saw firsthand how important they are after the genocide that happened in Rwanda. As a continent, Africa holds 26% of the biodiversity on the planet. We hold immense potential in terms of carbon sequestration and bringing back biodiversity. But unless the biodiversity is safeguarded, it can too easily be lost. During the 100 days of the genocide against the Tutsis, I didn't know if most of the people I loved in Rwanda were alive. I was writing my thesis. So the contrast of what was happening in my motherland and what I was doing as a student in Canada was huge. It was very difficult to reconcile. In the years since, I've met some of the people who worked with bean gene banks. Beans are really critical to the Rwandan economy and our traditional diets. And when the genocide happened, people were unable to harvest their crops. And so crops withered in the fields, and farmers couldn't collect seeds from them to plant and harvest for the next year. When the economy restarted, we needed to replenish the stocks of beans in the country. And because there were gene banks around the world that held copies of the genetic diversity of beans from Rwanda, we were able to restart. People don't understand the relationship between gene banks and what needs to happen when we have conflict or other terrible situations in the world and need to restart economies or restoration. It's important to understand that gene banks are very crucial to keeping hope alive, especially for our food systems and bringing back nature after major crises. At CIFOR ICRAF, we are home to one of the largest tropical tree seed collections in the world, 190 tree species represented, 7,000 seed samples accessions conserved, 3 decades of scientific and on-the-ground expertise, 30 countries represented in where these gene banks are, 1,800 smallholder households supported to access food tree species, and 6,000 farmers trained in food tree cultivation and use. But beyond safeguarding these seeds and making them available to use, we also use our expertise to help ensure that we grow the right tree at the right time for the right place so that the seedlings can thrive with purpose. Leading an organization that not only helps safeguard the brilliant trees diversity around us, but also shares with farmers, breeders, and researchers, and supports work to adapt trees to the changing climate, pest, disease, and other challenges, is a way of making sure my daughter and my daughter's children will never need to be left with an earth that's barren of biodiversity and life. And it brings me to our second challenge. CIFOR ICRAF is committed to solving climate challenge. A question we are confronted with daily is, how do we live within our planetary boundaries? How do we build interconnectedness? Right now, many of us are confronted with vicious cycles where poor practices or situations result in greater environmental damage, which exacerbates existing problems. In fact, of all the challenges we face negatively impact one another. But the key changes, we can move these vicious cycles into virtuous ones, creating smaller, big changes that positively influence one another to create new, positive, ingrained ways of thinking and doing things. I recall in my childhood where I spent a lot of time in the countryside with smallholder farmers and enjoying the beauty of our forests. And I remember how green everything was, how lush it was, and how little dust was in the air. Decades later, the same areas have seen genocide, deforestation, soil degradation, but there is hope in Rwanda, because to bring back biodiversity and focusing on green growth has been a priority for the country. I feel very lucky to have contributed to this new history for Rwanda as a member of the Presidential Advisory Council, which also includes two amazing Australians, Michael Roux and Doug Shears, both deeply committed to being outstanding global citizens. As you probably know, global temperatures are expected to rise 3 degrees by the end of the century. And I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone that trees play a critical role in avoiding catastrophic climate change. Trees are a source of food, shade, they conserve water, give us oxygen and clean air, support soil health, and support wildlife. And sustainable land management, including agroforestry, ecosystem conservation and restoration, and a transition to sustainable economic models are key for this. All CIFOR ICRAF research contributes to climate change mitigation and adaptation by helping to keep trees in the ground, increasing tree cover, and finding the best trees for local conditions. We've also done groundbreaking and award-winning research on wetlands. In 2017, our research using Global Wetlands Map revealed that there are 3 times more peat worldwide than previously thought. And prior to this pivotal 2011 discovery that mangroves store 3 to 5 times more carbon than other tropical forests, most of it in the soil, no one realized just how critical they are in our fight against climate change. And through this research, we're able to galvanize greater protection for wetlands, working together with partners, especially in Indonesia. It's critical research like this that both reveals and quantifies the value of our Earth's resources, that help galvanize protection that our scientists are at the forefront of. I should also mention our research on carbon markets. When I started looking at carbon markets in the early 2000s, Africa only had 5% of that market. I thought to grow Africa's sustainability and to build prosperity, it had to be green growth. And so I knew we would have to focus on climate funding. Today, we're in a much different space around nature and finance. We had a very successful COP15 in Montreal, where I had the opportunity to participate with the most private sector presence ever for a biodiversity COP. And so this work I see expanding. I envision a world where the private sector takes a greater role in climate change mitigation and reduces their own impact. Work at CIFOR ICRAF supports them to do this. Perhaps what's the most important in this room is our work explicitly around food security, though I would argue everything we do, as we've heard so far, has an impact on this. As I mentioned before, I became accurately aware of the importance of ensuring we safeguard our food security through international collaboration in Gene Bank during the Rwandan Civil War. But also, safeguarding and sharing seeds is one piece of the puzzle. Whether degraded restoring forests or restoring degraded forests or reestablishing local crop seed systems towards renewed energy towards food security, no conversation about food security can be had without discussions about trees. And when we talk about food and nutrition security in the context of agroforestry and forestry, no organization has a holistic approach as CIFOR ICRAF. For my part, I began my academic career at 17 at McGill. And during my undergraduate studies, when I went home and during my internship, it was really difficult to think that one day I'd be able to come back to Africa and work with smallholder farmers. So I decided to go on with my PhD and studied molecular genetics because I was interested in the cutting edge of innovation. Working at that interface of genetics, of discoveries that were going to change how we relate to DNA, for me was the alternative for what I really longed for, which was working at the cutting edge of food security globally. When I finished my PhD, I joined the biotechnology company in molecular diagnostics and worked on how to use DNA to look at food industry safety, on whether there are microbial contaminations for food, environmental contaminants, or even in some cases, we worked on bioterrorism. My early beginnings really allowed me to do work that I see was really critical to becoming the woman and the scientist I am today. And so one of the areas that I think is really critical is how are we looking at our soil, the Earth's skin? The health of our soil determines the health of our food systems, which will determine the health of our global populations. The interlinkage is a critical one, but 65% of Africa's soils are degraded, as are a third of soils around the world. Healthy soils are a foundation for functioning ecosystems, including sustainable agricultural systems. Our Nairobi campus is home to a state-of-the-art soil spectroscopy lab and the global database of ecosystem health indicators, one of the world's best tools for large-scale and accurate soil analytics. By assessing land and soil health, we can provide analysis at farm, landscape, and global levels and beyond. Beyond soils, we also look at trees and look at how they are dependent on the quality of soil in order to solve hunger. We're currently working with partners in India on Trees Outside Forests, a 5-year initiative funded by the United States Agency for International Development and the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate. And this initiative looks at expanding the areas that are cultivated outside of forests. The greatest opportunity in the world to grow trees are actually on farm. And so one of the things we see as critical, as in this project in India, which is a $25 million US project, is that we see this as really the possibility of strengthening the enabling environments to improve laws, regulations, policy, certification, and standards to scale up trees outside forests. We see this as a way to increase access to finance, insurance, and quality planting material to provide incentives and value chain support to boost the demand for products from trees outside farms. And also we see this as a way to bridge the gaps in technical and market information through extension service, knowledge, data, monitoring, and decision tools. When I see the work that we're doing in India in this case, I'm reminded of my own home of Rwanda and how planting the right tree in the right place for the right purpose can have such an immense impact in a relatively short amount of time, especially when planted on farms. And I'm reminded as well of how dry, dusty air can be transformed by a greener environment when there's fertile, and when smallholder farmers can have rich harvests of traditional foods, often neglected, but so important for local nutrition and food security. In fact, the topics we care so deeply about this evening are ones that CIFOR ICRAF has been committed to solving for the past 40+ years, safeguarding biodiversity, stabilizing the climate, transforming food systems and value chains, and ensuring equity in everything we do. These challenges interact with one another. And what we know is, fortunately, there are solutions which many of you here today are either championing, funding, or researching. At CIFOR ICRAF, that's exactly what happens every day. We have been at the forefront of combining rigorous science with an action-focused mission, building capacity, influencing global policy, and transforming ecosystems. Today, CIFOR ICRAF stands as one of the best examples of what is possible. I'm invigorated to lead CIFOR ICRAF, to harness what we've learned over decades of work and to rise to the moment, in this particular moment in human history, and use our collective passion, creativity, and intellect to build a better Earth. At CIFOR ICRAF, what we do is really groundbreaking research around trees, forests, and agroforestry and landscapes. But we've used our research to improve the lives of people and influence policy globally. And fortunately, we're implementing these solutions in partnership. and many of you today here are partners that we work with and are happy and look forward to doing even more with in the future. And so as a unified organization, because CIFOR has been around for 30 years, headquartered in Indonesia, and ICRAF for 45 years, headquartered in Nairobi, with offices in many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We are now a unified organization where from seeds of trees to our world-class gene bank to research on tropical forests and communities and biodiversity, make them our home. We bring together the expertise of scientists from around the world, communication experts, and fundraisers to develop innovative solutions to scale up investment in sustainable development and address the global challenges of our time. And so my journey has been one that has interfaced biodiversity, health, gender, agriculture, research, and I am so proud of the work we're doing today. And one example of the work we're doing is in the Yangambi engagement landscape in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So DRC is fortunate to have a wealth of natural resources. It's home to rich tropical forests of equal importance to the planet as Indonesia's forests and the Amazon. Nevertheless, the economic value of these resources hasn't reached most citizens. Our work in Yangambi is an example of what we can do when we work with local communities to support resource management. So more than 200,000 people live in this landscape. They rely on natural resources for their livelihoods, including logging, slash and burn agriculture, hunting and fishing. And the region's value chains primarily serve the city of Kisangani, a thriving market with about 2 million urban dwellers. Unfortunately, as you know, when income-generating activities are limited and the local population often has no other alternative than overexploitation, this can turn into a vicious cycle of destruction. And change is such in a complex environment requires long-term work. Fortunately, CIFOR ICRAF has been working in Yangambi for 15 years with a wide range of interventions in a single landscapes. Because the opposite of poverty isn't wealth, the opposite of poverty is actually opportunity, our objective is to help create opportunity in DRC. To do this, we support entrepreneurship, innovation, research, and management of natural resources, leading to the transformation of the Yangambi landscape into a place where forests contribute to the stable well-being of local communities. To do so, we focus on 5 main activities: capacity improvement, support for local entrepreneurship, biodiversity protection, research for development, and awareness raising. And we're achieving really remarkable results, turning a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. By involving local communities in conservation and scientific activities, they can improve their living conditions for a green future. Since 2019, our work has led to 2 million trees planted since 2019 and 2,300 hectares of land restored. It's also created more than 3,400 seasonal and direct jobs. This is just one example of the work that CIFOR ICRAF's amazing staff are being involved in. And so one of the things I also think is really critical is the work we're doing around communication around the world. And so the Global Landscape Forum is one powerful tool that reaches millions of people around the world and has chapters of young people who are champions of restoration that are able to connect and network and collectively support each other in their initiatives. And so what is really exciting for me is whether we're looking at the work we're doing with young people around the world, whether we're looking at a landscape like Yangambi, or a place like Côte d'Ivoire, which is one of the world's leading producers of cacao, where 800,000 smallholders produce about 40% of the world's supply of cocoa. But smallholder farmers that produce cocoa only get about 4% of the value of what we pay in chocolate every year. And so the work we keep doing is really about how do we ensure we can have greater benefits to these smallholder farmers that feed 75% of the population on the planet. And so the work we do, whether it's soil analysis, whether it's in partnering with indigenous peoples around the world, whether it's in looking at how we conserve forests around the world, whether it's the capacity I have with others around policy influence, like on the Presidential Advisory Council of Rwanda, is really about, for me, pursuing the legacy of my hero, Wangari Maathai, who I had the opportunity of meeting after she got her Nobel laureate. And she says, it's the little things citizens do that make the difference. My little thing is planting trees. And so I have the honor now of actually working with her daughter, Wanjira. And I think it's really amazing to know that we can work generation to generation and build on the wisdom, the resilience, and the vision of the ancestors that came before us to build a future that we hope will be better so that future generations know we've done all we could so that they have a better chance on this planet in harmony with nature than we currently have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Éliane. I think it was you were an inspired choice for tonight's talk. This afternoon in the Scholars Program, we heard from Éliane about how when she was a 17-year-old girl, she started off her career in International Agriculture for Development, taking the minutes for an FAO event. And she pointed out that even if you don't do something that's major, just being involved, doing something small but something still really important is a good way to start and a good way to continue your life. And she said she started off as a 17-year-old and now taking minutes, and now she is giving advice to national leaders. So it just goes to show what persistence and dedication to a cause can do. And my guess is she's talking about things like food security when she gives that sort of advice. Tonight we've been fortunate enough to hear what CIFOR is doing in agroforestry and its role in food security, and the holistic approach of CIFOR to food security and food nutrition. We've heard about the importance of seed banks for both biodiversity and for crops, and the importance of having the right trees and organisms planted in the right place at the right time. We've heard about the importance of trees in relation to climate change and mitigating climate change, in relation to shade, food, etc., and how important that is, trees being a key part of the system. We've also heard about the ambitions that Éliane has for carbon markets in Africa. It may be that we here who are very keen on carbon markets in this country can actually learn something from you about how you deal with carbon markets and getting the private sector very involved in carbon markets. We've heard about the importance of the health of soil and the need to improve soil, and CIFOR is doing a lot of work in that area. So I think tonight we've been really very fortunate to have such an inspiring speaker come and talk to us about the importance of trees. I found it fascinating because I do actually find planting trees a very therapeutic thing myself, to actually see them grow and you see some efforts for all your work. But we've heard about the importance of trees with climate change, with food availability, with food security, with rebuilding ecosystems and improving the lives of the people around them, which is the ultimate aim of it. So can I ask you to join me in thanking once again Éliane for such a fabulous lecture tonight. Thank you, Éliane. Thank you.